Today, we are talking 3 far too early predictions because it's the middle of July and we're all looking for something to talk about.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Locked On Flames. As always, I am your host, Jessica Belmosto of the Win Column and Offside News. Thank you for making Locked On Flames part of your day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. Today, we're going to, talk about 3 predictions that I have ahead of this season, as it is the middle of July, and there's really not much happening in regards to the Flames. So based on the stagnant water and lack of commotion, this is what I'm thinking. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Flames wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. We are in the off-season mode, so we are down to 3 shows a week, but I'm here for you whenever Flames news breaks. And speaking of breaking news, I have an idea that the biggest storyline of this offseason being Rasmus Andersson's impending trade, I have a feeling that he is going to start the season as a Flame. Based on the rumblings that we've heard that, there was a deal in place for LA, but he said, no, I'm good. And then just the lack of movement there. I think, a big part of the issue is him not wanting to extend in certain cities, which could, not to play devil's advocate too much, but that's why you maybe could have and should have traded him during last season. I don't know. But I think with Conroy's comments as well, in terms of, we're fine starting the season with him as a Flame. We're going to do what we can to obviously receive the best offer, yada, yada, yada. I think it's a very risky move, to be entirely honest. And to me, as a fan, but also as someone who has studied communications and public relations, his exit interview at the end of last season was his goodbye. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out, but that was very out of character for someone who is so meticulously media trained. I don't think the Flames should start the season with him as on the team, mainly because there's a ginormous liability issue with injury. Last season, he played 12 games with like a broken, is it femur, tibia? One of those, the shin. That's the tibia. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but he broke part of his leg. It was his fibula after he blocked a shot. So obviously that's not a horrible injury. Could obviously have been worse, but that's kind of the point. Accidents happen, as we have seen with Connor Zary. But I don't like the idea of carrying that much liability into the season. I just don't think it's worth the risk for the Flames. And quite honestly, we know that noise isn't anything new to this group. So like last season, they were coming off of all of the UFAs being traded. And then the season starts with Calgary shutting down any and all trade rumors. So heading into this season with this big of a distraction and kind of carrot dangling over their head in a way is is not anything new, especially when it is one of your longest tenured players, one of your star defensemen. I don't think that it's they can say it's not a distraction all they want, but I think at the end of the day, it is a little bit of a distraction and kind of like the elephant in the room. We saw it with Noah Hanifin. We saw it with Nikita Zadorov. We saw it, uh, ultimately, Andersson holds the power. But we've watched this before. We watched this play out 2 seasons ago. Noah Hanifin ultimately forced the Flames' hands to trade him to Vegas. And that's what happened. And to me, I feel like that is the only that may be the only team that he wants to sign an extension with at the moment. Maybe he goes and maybe they go into the season and he sees how, certain teams start off the season and, maybe someone throws out an offer and, they've had a hot start to the season. So he's willing to extend there, and the Flames, it's a win-win for both sides. But I think the issue here is ultimately you're not getting a good return for him unless he's extending in that city. And I don't blame teams on the other side of that. I wouldn't want to give up assets for a rental either. Or I guess the costly assets you'd have to give up to get Andersson for a rental. But I don't want him to start the season as a Flame. And I know that sounds ridiculous and sounds, very unfan-like. But to me, the sooner this is over and done with, the better, in all honesty. And coming up next, we are going to talk about why I don't think the Flames are going to see that much youth integration here on Locked On Flames. We have all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That is where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. I used Game Time last season to go to the Flames games, multiple, and it was the smartest decision I made all hockey season. I got great deals on very good seats, and I even got to see where my seats were and what my view from my seat would be, thanks to the panoramic seat view with Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out with me today on Locked On Flames and making the show part of your day. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube, because I will be carrying you through the offseason with 3 shows a week here on Locked On Flames. I feel like this may be potentially spicy. This might be a prediction that comes back, and I'm wrong. And I kind of hope that's the case, because if the Flames do integrate more youth, more than I expect, that likely means players like Blake Coleman or Ryan Lomberg or maybe Martin Pospisil or the biggest reach, Nazem Kadri, have been traded. Because right now the Flames don't have any really open spots. I think that obviously there are spots to play for. But I don't know if there's a spot in the lineup. That is where I'm at. I think the Flames don't like changing things, and they don't like risky moves unless it's, of course, bringing players back for a season before you trade them. But anyways, I think there will be every reason under the sun to not change the lineup if either the team gets off to a hot start or individual players get off to a hot start. We did see a little bit of change last year, but only at the expense of Anthony Mantha and Justin Kirkland. The reason Matt Coronato was able to slide into the lineup and stay there was because Anthony Mantha tore his ACL. That likely would not have been an option had that not happened. Unless there are multiple trades that happen, I do not see the Flames calling up players like Suniev or Rory Kerins. I don't see it. And I'm really not trying to be pessimistic because I want to see more. I want to see more from these kids. I think that ultimately you're only going to see that if you're trading players. You're obviously not putting Blake Coleman on waivers. You're obviously not going to put, Adam Klapka on waivers. I think that I'm mainly talking about the forwards, but I think that even like with the defensemen, you have Zane Parekh and Hunter Rustowicz waiting in the wings, and there's no real room for them unless Andersson gets traded and you kind of rotate your bottom pairing. I think for a player like Rustowicz for now, but ultimately, this team has made it clear that they still want to stick around and compete. They want to be a playoff team while still rebuilding. But I guess, it's the Flames way. It is the Flames philosophy. We know that things are kind of done in an oxymoronic kind of way. But, ultimately, it's going to happen one way or another. And heaven forbid you move your hot veterans at the expense of your future. Because you could absolutely get at least a second for Blake Coleman. You know that trading Kadri would get you a haul. Toronto has nothing that I'm interested in. So ultimately I don't want him to be traded there. But when it comes to being able to add youth, like you're doing it either because someone gets hurt. I'm using Michael Backlund as an example because he is 37 years old. Okay, let's say he hurts his back and his oblique again. Are you calling up Rory Kerins or are you using Justin Kirkland, who's on a one-way contract this year? What is your plan to get these young kids ice time? Because you can't do it without trading players, because you're not going to be benching Ryan Lomberg. You're not going to be benching Backlund. You're not going to be healthy scratching Blake Coleman. Like, those aren't things that are going to happen. And same thing for your back end. You're not going to be scratching, I mean, you could scratch Braden Pahal, but I don't see a world where the Flames do that, at least to start the season. But it's just very difficult for me to sit here and say, I see a world where they do integrate more youth, where we see these young guys finally get a shot. The 3 RFAs that signed yesterday. Oh yeah, they're definitely going to be able to crack the lineup, blah, 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 and have consistent playing time. No, because there just aren't enough spots. And obviously those spots are earned, not given. But at the end of the day, why should a veteran that's, whether they're playing bad, poorly, like my brain goes back to Lucic. Like why he was in the lineup over younger players still baffles me. And the prospect pipeline did look different at that time, but there were players that could have made the jump, especially fourth line minutes. Matthew Phillips was there, Jacob Pelletier was there. Like there were options. And now it feels like they're wasting Jeremy Poirier, Rory Kerins, Yan Kuznetsov a bit, Solo. I mean, what's his name? Suniev. He's played one NHL game. So I find it very hard to say, we're wasting him after he's only played one game and it was the end of the season. So it's not like there was opportunity for him to play many more. But it's going to take a lot, I think, for the Flames to kind of wake up and see, oh, I can cash in on this. Like if things are going south, like 2 seasons ago when you drafted 9th overall, buddy, you should be taking every single phone call on every player. Well, just about every player. And you should potentially explore asking players, hey, would you be cool like waiving your no trade clause or your no movement clause? Or I like Blake Coleman only has a 10-team approved trade list. Hey, this team that's not on your list is calling for you. They're in a playoff position. How do you feel about going there? Things like that. Because at the end of the day, we know Conroy wants to keep the room happy. And you don't want to end things on bad terms. So I think that's what's going to have to happen. Hopefully this sounds awful. With the 2026 draft being so filled with talent, it would behoove the Flames to trade away those veterans and allow these younger kids to play. I'm not saying tank, but these are crucial development minutes for players that, could be pushed into one of these spots. And coming up next, we're going to wrap up the show with my opinions on some potential coaching changes and the kind of idea of the Flames actually firing Ryan Huska midseason. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out with me today on Locked On Flames. Make sure you're following me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Just Belmosto. So there was an idea, a movement, if I don't even want to call it a movement, this concept last season floating around that the Flames should fire Huska. My biggest thing with the Flames, since I started hosting the show, is number one, they go through coaches like dirty underwear. Number two, they only give the coaches so many assets to work with, right? Like you're not going to cook up a Florida Panthers Stanley Cup winning team with the roster that is in front of you. I think that were things misused in the era of the purple Gatorade line, or with a Ginla even, like there were missteps along the way. And I'm not saying coaches are perfect by any means. God, we know that. But I think that the Flames are performing at the level of like average, because that's what they are as a team. If you look at this roster construction, you don't have an elite center. You don't have, I mean, I guess you can count Kadri, but you don't have a young elite center. You don't have forwards like you did a few years ago when you had Kachuk and Johnny. You don't have a Sean Monahan, a healthy Sean Monahan. And your defense is still a work in progress. And thank God for Dustin Wolf, because, I mean, at the end of the day, he's the one that dragged this team to the finish line last season. But I don't think that the Flames are going to fire Ryan Huska mid-season or at the end of the season, unless things go horrible. We saw how much of a fight it was for them to fire Sutter. I believe that this is Huska's last year of his contract. So could he be extended and then ultimately let go during that? And then Trent Cull steps up, because we know that this team just rotates from assistant coach to head coach, and it's like a revolving door. And then like in 4 years, Brett Sutter is going to be coaching the team. Like, to me, I think regardless of who's behind the bench right now, you have a mediocre constructed team. You have players on here that should be performing better and could be performing better if they were used properly. But it's hard to be used properly when you don't have like that key component. I think that if Huberdeau, I think that we're seeing it with Coronado on that top line. Like, if Coronado had someone to do his pass to, fire it off, then that's different. But when you have really 3 third lines after second, or I guess a second line and 2 fourth pairing, or 2 third lines or fourth lines, even depending on which way they're constructed, you're not going to be doing anything. It's hard to be optimistic. And I have a very difficult time believing that Huska doesn't have a long leash with the Flames organization. And it's not because he's like buddy with, the owners, or, haha, he has dirt on someone. I think it's because they know that the team he inherited was not designed to be competitive. And it's in Conroy's hands to change that. But even if things go very wrong, I cannot see Craig Conroy firing Ryan Huska midseason. I just don't see that at all. That isn't necessarily the kind of ship Conroy runs. I think that, while Huska has a long leash from the organization, I think the players also have a longer leash too. So we know that Conroy has a vision. We are seeing it slowly executed, slowly come to life. And I don't even think you can call it coming to life. That feels very generous. But there are pieces of the puzzle being put together that don't go together. And right now, the Flames are still working on figuring out what the missing pieces are. So hopefully this season goes about as good for the Flames as a top draft pick gets. Because ultimately that's what the Flames need to continue this rebuild along. But that'll do it for me here on today's episode of Locked On Flames. Thank you so much. I would love to hear your way too early predictions and sound off on what you think. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. We are here for you 3 days a week through the off season, and we'll be back in full swing before you know it.